The anime begins by showing a young man named Mirai Kakahashi who wants to end his life by jumping from the roof of a very high building. All this time, Mirai felt that his life was very painful and full of suffering, so he thought of ending all that pain by ending his life. Mirai is an orphan who had lived with his uncle and aunt since his parents died when he was young, but his uncle and aunt never treat him well, so he feels very empty and doesn't have anyone in this world. Mirai was sure of his decision and threw himself off the top of the building. But just before he fell to the ground, a female angel named Nas came and saved him from death. Then Nas takes Mirai to a place above the clouds and says she will make his life happier by giving him power. Afterward, she gives Mirai a choice to choose between having a pair of white wings that can make him can fly or a red arrow that can make him conquer others. Mirai, who was still desperate, thought that everything Nas said was not real, so he asked for the two things that Nas had to offer. But unexpectedly, she actually gave a pair of white wings and a red arrow to Mirai, making him believe that everything he was witnessing was real. Nas asked Mirai not to give up hope and continue his life with a happy feeling. She also tells Mirai about his family secret that Mirai has not known until now, namely the truth that the people who killed his parents were his own uncle and aunt. Hearing that, Mirai looked surprised and still had a hard time believing it all, but eventually, Mirai started to feel that all of this made sense. So far, his uncle, aunt, and cousin have never treated Mirai as a family and have always tortured him like a slave. However, he wanted to hear the truth directly from them, so he returned to their apartment and put an arrow in his aunt's body. Suddenly, she became submissive to Mirai and was willing to admit all the crimes that she and her husband had committed. Mirai's aunt also admits that they did all that because they wanted to get all the inheritance from Mirai's grandfather. They deliberately raised him to get insurance money for the death of his parents. Hearing that, Mirai was very angry that his aunt could do all that to his parents, and he subconsciously asked her to die. Suddenly, his aunt killed herself because she was still under the influence of the red arrows. Mirai's uncle, who witnessed all the events, looked surprised but couldn't do anything. Meanwhile, Mirai, who had just realized that he had killed his own aunt, was devastated and intended to call an ambulance, but unfortunately, it was too late, and an angel of death took the soul of his aunt. Seeing his aunt die in front of his eyes, Mirai finally realized that ending his life was stupid, and he was reminded of all the beautiful memories he had with his parents. After his aunt died, Mirai shut himself in his room for several days because he was still traumatized by the incident. After a few days of thinking, Mirai begins to wish for a normal life where he has a place to live, enough food, and enough money to go to school. Hearing this, Nas advised him to kill his uncle and his cousin to get back the money that belonged to his parents and his place to live. She even gives Mirai a new power in the form of a white arrow which he can use to kill someone directly. However, Mirai refuses to use that power and prefers to get rid of his uncle in a normal way. Then he asked why Nas gave him all these powers, and she told him that the gods had commissioned 13 angels to select 13 humans who would later become candidates. Hearing this, Mirai began to feel worried because his desire to live a normal life must be hampered. It turns out that Nas is one of the 13 angels sent by God to descend to Earth and choose a human they deem fit to become a god. Every angel competes with each other to find a human they will choose to become a candidate for a god. The next day, when Mirai was watching a television broadcast, he saw a very popular male comedian with an angel who always accompanied him. The comedian named Tama Rodriguez uses the power of the red arrow to make artists fall in love with him, and thanks to that power, Tama currently has many beautiful women loyal to him. Every night, Tama would go on a date with some pretty girls and have fun with them all night. But one day, a young man wearing a costume resembling a cyborg suddenly appeared in front of Tama and killed him with a white arrow. It turns out that the young man is one of the god candidates, like Mirai, and intends to kill the other candidates to become a god. The next day, Mirai and Nas went to a high school to register, and luckily he was successfully accepted at the high school after he passed the selection. After he succeeded in getting his uncle to admit to the police that he had killed Mirai's parents, so that he could get back the wealth that had been stolen by his uncle. Although everything had been going well for him, Mirai panicked when he learned that Tama, a good candidate like him, died suddenly without knowing the cause. However, Mirai still doesn't know that the person who killed Tama is another good candidate. He still feels anxious because he is afraid that someone will kill him to get the power he has. While walking in the middle of town, Mirai sees an attempted robbery at a bank by several people, and the robbers are thought to have killed several bank visitors. Shortly after that, the masked man who previously killed Tama suddenly, in front of the police officers, introduces himself as a Metropolitan hero who will put down crime in the city. Metropolitan then shoots red arrows at the cop to get the cop to believe him, and then he flies into the bank using his white wings. With a lightning-fast attack, Metropolitan kills the bank robbers and rescues several hostages who are still trapped in the building. After completing his mission, Metropolitan announces that he has killed an enemy on Earth, and now he only needs to kill 11 other enemies to become a god. After hearing this, Mirai and Nas finally found out that the person who killed Tama was Metropolitan, and currently, he is targeting other god candidates to be killed. Seeing this situation, Mirai asked Nas to remove the power of the wings and arrows from his body because he wanted to live a normal life. But Nas said she couldn't do that because if she removed the power from his body, Mirai might die. The next day, when Mirai comes to school, he sees another angel flying around his classmate, Saki Hanakago. It turns out that Saki used to be Mirai's school friend at his old school, and all this time, he has secretly liked Saki, but he doesn't dare to express his feelings to her. When Saki saw Mirai in front of her, she suddenly shot a red arrow at his body so that Mirai would follow everything she said. It turns out that she wanted him to come to her room and wait for her there until she came home from school. When Saki arrived home, she was introduced to an angel named Revel, a first-level male angel who could only give her the power of a red arrow. Soon after, Revel asked Mirai to become Saki's wing and take her to fly up into the sky, so they could practice flying together. When they were flying, Mirai was surprised to see Saki's face, which looked so gloomy, so he asked her to be more cheerful and start living life happily. After they finished flying together, Revel asked Mirai to help kill Metropolitan so that Saki could survive from being Metropolitan's target. Even though Mirai is actually someone who can't kill other people, he is still under the influence of Saki's red arrow, so he obeys Revel's words and goes out looking for Metropolitan. However, Nas stopped Mirai because it was too dangerous for him, and then asked Revel to work together. Fortunately, Revel and Saki agreed, so they released red arrows from Mirai's body and asked him to stay with them. A few days later, Metropolitan broadcast on one of the television stations and announced that he was inviting the other 11 god candidates to the Jinbo Stadium for a meeting. Metropolitan did all that on purpose so he could lure all the god candidates to that place and kill them all. The next day, Mirai and Saki decide to come to the stadium and wait in the audience seats to find out what Metropolitan will actually do. Meanwhile, Nas and Revel will wait and watch the show from home, so Metropolitan doesn't realize that Mirai and Saki are god candidates. When the event broadcast lives on television started, Metropolitan came to the middle of the stadium field and was followed by several other god candidates. Suddenly, a god candidate wearing a Blue Ranger's costume moves to the center of the field and attacks him with a red arrow. But it turns out that the person in the middle of the field is just the fake Metropolitan, while the real one is still hiding somewhere. The god candidates, who call themselves Metro Blue and Metro Yellow, turn on the microphone and ask the real Metropolitan to come out of his hiding place. It turned out that they were a man named Shogo Hatakeyama and Saburo Tabuchi, who both failed their university exams and decided to end their lives together. But just before they do that, 2 female angels come to save them and promise them a new, happier life. When Metro Blue and Metro Yellow were challenging Metropolitan to come to the stadium, a little girl named Chio Nakayama was seen flying into the middle of the field with her white wings and intending to join them. Chio is also a god candidate who was chosen by an angel after she tried to end her own life after she experienced bullying at her school. Shortly before Chio joined Metro Blue and Metro Yellow, Metropolitan suddenly appeared and stabbed a red arrow into her body so that currently he could control her. Seeing this situation, Metro Blue and Metro Yellow asked the other god candidates to join their group and defeat Metropolitan together. But with one condition, namely, candidates who will join their group must be willing to be shot with red arrows by them. Not long after that, 2 other god candidates, Metro Green and Metro Pink, came to the center of the field and volunteered to join them. However, it turned out that they were just a trap prepared by Metropolitan to catch Metro Blue and Metro Yellow off guard. Metropolitan then uses the opportunity to shoot a white arrow at Metro Blue until he is killed and then shoots a red arrow at Metro Yellow to control him. It turned out that Metro Green and Metro Pink were just ordinary people paid by Metropolitan to pretend to be god candidates. After that, Metropolitan tied Metro Yellow and Chio in handcuffs and started executing them in front of the entire audience. When Chio saw Metro Yellow, who died beside her, she screamed for help from everyone to save her. Mirai and Saki, who saw what happened, panicked and confused. They didn't know what to do in a situation like that. Because of panic, Saki kept begging everyone in that place to save Chio, but unfortunately it was too late. Metropolitan has killed her and taken power from her so that he can become stronger. Not long after that, Nas came to the middle of the stadium and asked Metropolitan to speak privately. Then she asked all candidates to leave the stadium safely and return to their respective homes. At night when Mirai arrived home, he was still haunted by Chio's terrible death, and that incident made him remember what his father had said. His father once told her not to hate anyone and never to hurt others even if they acted mean to him. That's what makes Mirai grow into a very naive young man who cannot repay the evil deeds done by other people. The next day, Saki proposes to gather other candidates and invites them to work together to beat Metropolitan. She was pretty sure that the other god candidates felt that Metropolitan was a threat to them, so she was sure that the other candidates would be willing to work with them. In the middle of the conversation, a middle-aged man named Nanato Makedo came to Saki's house and said he would join them. Makedo is an engineer who works for a company manufacturing combat suits and has a family. But a few days ago, Makedo's health worsened due to his deadly disease, and the doctor told him he only had 3 months left. Suddenly, a female angel named Barrett approached him and offered him a better life as a god candidate. After Makedo officially joined Saki and Mirai, they decided to make a costume so Metropolitan wouldn't know their identity. Elsewhere, a rich and handsome young man named Yuri Kanade is living his life as a high school student as usual. But people don't know that Kanade is actually the true form of Metropolitan, who previously killed 4 other god candidates. During lunchtime, a classmate of Kanade named Minami Kawa came up to him and invited him to see the beautiful girls next to their class. However, Kanade wasn't interested in that, and then asked Minami what he would do if he had the power to become a god. Then he casually said he would kill all the ugly and poor women on this earth. Hearing that, Kanade agrees with Minami's wish, but he has a different wish where he wants to revive his little sister, who died several years ago. At the same time, Mirai, Saki, and Makedo are looking for candidates for other gods to make their group allies. After gathering some information and conducting investigations, Makedo finally found a list of people he suspected as candidates for other gods. In the middle of the discussion, they saw a television broadcast that reported a former female model on the loose and killed teenage girls. The woman, Masurin, targeted underage junior high school girls as victims, and then abused the girls before killing them. However, it turns out that the real culprit is not Masurin but Kanade, who has been controlling her secretly using his red arrows. Apparently, Kanade has distributed his wings and arrows to humans he wants to control to get what he wants. Seeing that the situation was getting precarious, Makedo and Saki tried to devise a plan to kill Metropolitan. On the other hand, Mirai was too naive and hesitant to carry out the murder. Then Makedo convinces him they must kill Metropolitan first if they don't want to become Metropolitan's next target. The only person out of the 3 of them who has the power of the white arrow is Mirai, and Makedo wants him to realize that they have to do all that to save the other god candidates. But Mirai, who doesn't dare to hurt others, becomes panicked and confused. The next morning after Makedo sees the news about another girl falling victim to Masurin, he decides to give Saki and Mirai a weapon to protect themselves from Masurin's attacks. On the other hand, Masurin, who had just killed a middle school girl in a tower, attacked the police using arrows to make the police submit to her. Back to Makedo and Mirai, who had put on their combat suits and prepared to defeat Masurin together. At that point, Mirai was still confused because he wasn't sure if he could kill someone, but Makedo said they had to kill Masurin to save the other girls. After Makedo arrived at the top of the tower, he found Masurin relaxing while waiting for Metropolitan to arrive at that place, while Mirai was monitoring from under the tower to find the location of Metropolitan's whereabouts. But not long after that, the tower building suddenly exploded, causing Makedo to fall from the top very hard. Luckily, Mirai saved him and took him to a safer place, while Masurin died from the big explosion. It turns out it was all a plan by Metropolitan to lure out the other god candidates and kill them on the spot. Shortly after that, he approached Mirai and Makedo and forced one to surrender. He threatens that if they don't give up their powers, he will blow up another building, potentially killing more people. Seeing this situation, Makedo tries to distract Metropolitan by saying he is willing to sacrifice himself, while Mirai will find a way to shoot red arrows at Metropolitan's body. However, because the plan failed, Makedo was almost killed by Metropolitan's white arrows, and Mirai was forced to face him. Soon after, the battle between them happened, and it was fierce. Suddenly, the tense action of the battle was accidentally caught by the camera covering the tower explosion incident. After a long fight, Makedo finally manages to catch Metropolitan from behind, but Mirai cannot kill him with his white arrow. Because of that, Metropolitan tries to fight to escape Makedo's grip, but before he escapes, Makedo shoots a gun at his mask so Mirai can see Metropolitan's true face. That next night when Mirai and the others are discussing at Saki's house, he feels that he is not fit to join the fight because he doesn't dare to kill others. In the last few days, Saki's friends have started gossiping about the relationship between Saki and Mirai because they think they are having an affair. But Saki denied all the accusations and said she didn't have feelings for him. The next day, Mirai has always been secretly watching and following Saki everywhere to protect her from attacks by Metropolitan or other god candidates. On the other hand, when Kanade entered class, his friends looked worried to see his head badly injured. However, he lied to everyone in the class by saying that he only slipped while going down the stairs. But Minami, who recently felt strange by his attitude, finally realized that Kanade was the real Metropolitan. Then she prefers to pretend not to know anything because she doesn't want to put herself in danger. Back to Mirai, who is discussing with Saki and Makoto to find out who is behind the Metropolitan costume based on the characteristics given by Mirai. Mirai reveals that Metropolitan is a young man whose age is not much different from his, who has pale white skin and is quite handsome. Hearing this, Makoto asked Mirai to recall the face of the mysterious young man and draw his face on a piece of paper. Another night, Saki suddenly approaches Mirai and intends to sleep beside him for no apparent reason. Then she apologizes to him because all this time, she had bullied Mirai when they were both still in their old high school. When Saki wanted to meet Mirai to apologize to him, she had to witness him, who was about to end his own life by jumping from the top of the building. The incident traumatized Saki, and she felt so guilty about Mirai that she intended to end her life by drowning herself in the sea. At that time, Saki met Revel and became one of the god candidates, just like Mirai. Until now, she is still haunted by a huge sense of guilt towards him, so that night, she begs him to kill her. Unexpectedly, Mirai obeyed Saki's words and intended to drop her from a height so she would die. Revel, who saw what happened, started to panic, and he intended to help Saki, but Nas kept blocking him and asked him not to interfere. When Mirai almost let go of Saki's hand from his grip, she looked very scared and began to realize that she was still not ready to leave this world. Then she held Mirai's hand tightly and begged him to forgive her. Mirai, who never hated her, saved her. Since then, they have promised to always take care of each other and keep fighting together to live happier lives. After Saki let go of all the burdens of guilt she had been carrying, she slowly began to change into a more cheerful girl and was increasingly eager to help the team complete its mission. She even rented a bigger apartment so they could all hold meetings more comfortably and make that place their base. Then she asks Barrett how she can get a pair of white wings like Mirai. Shortly after, Barrett explains that a celestial angel like Revel cannot give their chosen candidate a pair of wings because Revel is the first-degree angel. Unlike Nas, who is an angel of a special level who can give greater power to their chosen human. Then Barrett says that Saki can have the wings if she kills the other god candidates and takes the wings' power from them. But because Saki doesn't want to kill other people, the only way to get wings is to increase Revel's power level to become a second-level angel so that he can give Saki the power of a pair of white wings. On the other hand, Kanade and his female angel, Miza, are looking at the video footage of the battle between him and Makoto to analyze what powers Makoto has. Miza is an angel of a special level like Nas, and she is known as a cruel angel who has been pushing Kanade to kill other god candidates. Back to Mirai and his team, who have just arrived at an old church that has not been used for a long time, where they plan to use the church as their new headquarters. At the same time, Makoto has finished making a multifunctional ranger's costume for Saki, while Revel is still struggling to increase his strength level. On the other hand, a man named Hajime Sokatani, a god candidate, employs a private detective to find out information about the identities of other god candidates. Hajime was originally a man who was very poor and not very good-looking, so throughout his life he was always treated badly by the people around him. The only family that Hajime had also died a few years ago, so he decided to end his own life. But just as Hajime was about to do that, a male angel named Balta came and promised him an easier life. After that, Hajime uses the power of the red arrow to make a girl fall for him so that the girl falls in love and is willing to date him. But when Hajime was about to kiss the girl, he accidentally saw his face from the reflection and became very insecure with his own face. Therefore, he decided to do plastic surgery and change his face to be more handsome so that people would be more fascinated by him. After Hajime discovered that Kanade was one of the god candidates like him, he became obsessed with Kanade and chose to work with him. Afterward, Kanade used Hajime as his pawn to lure Makoto and the other god candidates. The next day, Hajime carried Kanade's order and kidnapped Makoto's family members to a building in an amusement park. Then Kanade contacted Makoto and told him where his family was being held so that Makoto could fall into the trap he had prepared. Shortly after, Makoto and Mirai go to the location with Nas while Saki and Revel will fight to increase his power level so he can give Saki a pair of wings. When Mirai and Makoto arrived at the amusement park, Makoto rushed into the greenhouse to save his wife and daughter there. But apparently it was just a trap so that Kanade and Hajime could lock him in that place. After Makoto fell into the trap, Kanade and Hajime attacked him from two different directions. But Mirai tries to avoid the attack and enters the greenhouse to help Makoto save his family. Soon after, Mirai and Makoto carried his family and tried to fly out of the greenhouse building, but their efforts kept failing. After successfully trapping Makoto and Mirai in the greenhouse, Kanade orders Hajime to guard the greenhouse while he watches over them from the computer in his house. Hajime, who had never received love from his family, was very surprised when he saw Makoto willing to sacrifice for his family. After being trapped in the greenhouse for several days, Mirai and Mikado start running out of steam as they keep forcing themselves to use their powers. On the other hand, Saki, worried because Mirai didn't come home, started crying, and her tears miraculously made Revel level up to become a second-level angel. As a result, Revel gave Saki the power of a pair of white wings, so she used that power to save Mirai and Mikado. When Saki and Revel arrived at their destination, Nas and Barrett, who had previously been hiding somewhere, also appeared to help them save Mirai and Mikado. Then they decided to shoot arrows at Hajime to control him, and Saki also managed to make him submit to her. After successfully subduing Hajime, Saki tries to tempt him so that he is willing to defect and help her to fight Kanade. Shockingly, Hajime melted into her charm and helped Saki break into the greenhouse using a sword until the greenhouse building cracked. Kanade, who realized this, rushed to the location to attack Saki, but Hajime, who had sided with her, protected her from the attack. At the same time, Mikado and Mirai had also managed to charge out of the greenhouse thanks to the cracks created by Hajime's blade earlier. Afterward, Saki rushes to safely take Mikado's daughter and wife to their hideout base before finally she goes after Mirai and Mikado to fight Kanade. Arriving at the place, Revel advised Saki, Mirai, and Mikado to shoot their red arrows at each other so they wouldn't be captured by enemy arrows. At the same time, several of Kanade's men also appeared at that place, so Kanade ordered Hajime to kill the remaining candidates. After Hajime defeated a man wearing combat armor, he had to face a woman named Fuyuko Kohinata with a poison virus weapon. She plans to detonate a virus bomb in the air so that all humans die from the deadly virus's contamination. Then Kanade tries to provoke Fuyuko so that she is willing to kill Mirai and his friends first. Knowing that Mirai flew towards Fuyuko and intended to stop her so he could save many people from the threat of the virus. When Mirai arrives in front of Fuyuko, she activates the radioactive bomb so that the virus from the bomb starts to spread out. But fortunately, Mirai can deactivate the radioactive bomb by using his white arrow, and he is also ready to attack Fuyuko. However, since Mirai is still afraid of hurting others, Fuyuko uses the opportunity to fire the virus weapon at him first. Saki, who saw what happened, tried to protect Mirai with her body, but it turned out that Hajime, who had fallen in love with her, could not let that happen, and he preferred to sacrifice himself for Saki. Fortunately, after that, Hajime managed to throw his sword at Fuyuko's body. However, one of her poisonous weapons hit his body, causing his body to melt, and he died. After Hajime died, the angel Balta then handed over the power of his wings and red arrows to Saki before he went to take Hajime to heaven. On the other hand, Mikado, who has run out of energy, suddenly faints due to his worsening disease, so Mirai is forced to fight Kanade alone. Suddenly, Mirai tells Kanade not to worry too much because he won't kill him with the white arrows, but he will just subdue Kanade with the red arrows and hand him over to the police so that Kanade is imprisoned. Hearing this, Kanade insults Mirai and says he is just naive and lacks the courage to kill anyone. Soon after, the one-on-one duel battle between them started, and the fight was fierce. Unlike Mirai, who had to live a life full of suffering with her uncle and aunt, Kanade grew up with luck because he was born into a wealthy family. So far, he has always been surrounded by people from very respectable noble families and rarely associates with people of low social status. He has a very arrogant attitude, and he really hates dirty people and poor people because Kanade thinks of them as disgusting people. Throughout his life, Kanade loved his little sister, Rei Yuryu, and he always spoiled her by giving her everything she asked for. Their relationship is very close, and Kanade is willing to do anything for his little sister, who he loves so much. However, when Rei reached her teenage years, she fell in love with a boy, which made Kanade feel very jealous because he didn't want to lose her. One night, when Rei intends to meet the boy she likes, Kanade gets very angry and tries to stop her from going anywhere. But that incident made him lose Rei after she accidentally fell from the top of the castle and died from a hard impact on her head. After Rei died, Kanade secretly preserved her body so he could always see her face. Over time, Kanade, feeling empty after Rei disappeared from his life, became very depressed and decided to end his own life. But the angel Misa suddenly appears to stop him, and chooses him as the next god candidate. Hearing that, he agreed to this and was determined to become a god so he could use his powers to bring Rei back to life. Back to the battle between Kanade and Mirai, who were still exchanging arrows at each other, and the battle was coincidentally broadcast live by the television media. It turned out there was a boy named Susumu Yudo, a god candidate, who also watched the battle on television and seemed very excited to see the bet. After a fierce battle, Mirai finally succeeded in snaring Kanade with a rope, thanks to the help of Saki and the others. After Kanade could no longer move, Mikado, who had woken up from fainting, began preparing to fire a bullet at him. While remembering his memories, Makoto gathered all his remaining strength to fire the weapon at Kanade so he could protect everyone. Surprisingly, even though Makoto had succeeded in killing Kanade with his own hands, he did not get the wings and the power of the white arrow from Kanade. As it turns out, he couldn't get Kanade's power because Susumu had already shot a red arrow into Kanade's body before the fight started. So Susumu has forced Kanade to promise to give up all his power to Susumu if he dies in the fight against Mirai later. After the fight ended, Mirai and the others rushed Makoto to the hospital so he could receive medical treatment. But unfortunately, he couldn't last much longer because his cancer had reached its final stage and spread throughout his body. After Makoto died, Barrett gave his power to Saki before he finally left, taking his soul to fly into the sky. Makoto's family and his friends, who have fought with him to the end, must accept the bitter reality that Makoto is no longer by their side. That night, Saki approaches Mirai, grieving over Makoto's departure, and tries to calm her down. Then she tells Mirai that Makoto can't get Kanade's power because someone shot a red arrow into Kanade's body before the fight started. It turns out that Susumu had shot a red arrow at Kanade's body when he was at school, and it was Susumu who had asked Kanade to fight against Mirai because he wanted to have the power of Mirai's white arrow. That night, Mirai calculated the strength of each of the remaining god candidates, so he could prepare himself if, one day, the candidate with the greatest power would attack them. The next day, while Mirai and Saki are having breakfast together, Nas and the other angels meet above the sky to discuss their reduced god candidates, leaving only 7 people. They suspected that the remaining 7 candidates would fight each other for the position of god, but they were still not sure who would become the god of the 7 candidates. After the meeting ended, Revel came over to Saki and Mirai, who were having breakfast together, and showed a live broadcast of a boy claiming to be a god candidate. It turns out that the person doing the live broadcast is Susumu, a boy from a simple family who still has both parents who love him very much. Unfortunately, his parents are always busy with their jobs, and they never know anything about his life. Apart from growing up without his parents' love, Susumu also didn't have any friends, so he already felt lonely at a very young age. In the midst of that emptiness, he saw some sleeping pills on the table, and he intended to end his own life by taking these pills. But just before he took the sleeping pill, a male angel named Panema appeared and offered Susumu the chance to become one of the god candidates. After Susumu got the power of the red arrow from Panema, his life began to change for the more beautiful because all the children became interested in playing with him. When Susumu finds out about the appearance of Metropolitan on television, he realizes that his life is in danger, so he tries to find Metropolitan and shoots red arrows to control him. Back to the live broadcast held by Susumu. On that broadcast, he asked the other god candidates to gather and hold a meeting to determine who was more worthy to become a god among them. After the live broadcast was watched by everyone, the government began to be in an uproar with Susumu's announcement. The government began tracking him and the other candidates. After the government's special forces managed to track him down, they rushed to arrest him. However, Susumu can easily escape from that place and disappears in seconds. The government wanted to arrest Susumu and the other candidates to prove whether those candidates had the power of a god. If the government has confirmed that the god candidates are real, they plan to use them as biological combat weapons. On the other hand, it turns out that Saki is still under the influence of Mirai's red arrow. But she deliberately lets the arrow remain in her body because she wants Mirai to become the owner of her power if one day she dies. The next day, when Saki and Mirai were returning home from school, a black man suddenly approached them and asked them to go somewhere. The people who caught them both were a young man named Hoshi Masaya and a woman named Minami Yumiki, who wanted to help them from the police who were hunting for god candidates. Then Hoshi explains that the government is hunting for gods candidates to turn them all into mass-killing machines. Afterward, he takes Mirai and Saki to live with Yumiki in an apartment hidden from the city center. At first, Mirai doubted what Hoshi said and thought he was a criminal who wanted to take advantage of them. But then Nas told him that Hoshi was telling the truth, and he didn't need to feel wary of Hoshi. After Saki gives one of her power rings to Yumiki, she finally sees the angel in person. After that, Yumiki and the others started tracking down the 4 god candidates, who were still unidentified. After researching various existing data, Yumiki finally learned that one of the female candidates, Yuri Temari, had been arrested by the police while the other candidates were still unknown. The next day, Saki and Mirai also started their search by interrogating Minami, who used to be Kanade's best friend. At first, they thought that Minami was a candidate for another god because he managed to date a beautiful underage girl. But it turns out that he isn't a god candidate, and just an ordinary human. Knowing this, Mirai decided to make Minami a fake candidate and spread it on the internet. After searching various places, Mirai and Saki finally found one of the god candidates named Nakomi, who is still 13 years old. At that time, they managed to stop him, who intended to end his life with his older brother because of their difficult situation. Then they brought Nakomi and his brother to Hoshi's house so they could discuss their next plans. The next day, when Mirai and Saki appear in public in their uniforms, Susumu suddenly appears towards them, so Mirai uses the opportunity to invite him to join them. At the same time, Revel and several other angels were also trying to save Temari from the police station so they could take her to Hoshi's headquarters. Then Temari used her red arrow power to trick the police officers there so that the police were willing to help her escape from that place. That night, after Temari managed to escape into the forest, Susumu picked her up and gave her a pair of wings. On the other hand, after Mirai and the others had gathered, they began discussing who they would choose to be the next god candidate. Nakomi, who still doesn't know much about the gods, asks his angel named Aguro to explain the origins of the gods. Then Aguro explains that a god is a universal ruler with unlimited power to subdue and kill everyone. Therefore, the candidate who must be chosen to become a god must be a human who has always been wise in determining the fate of mankind. After Mirai and the others discussed, they finally decided to choose Nakomi as the main candidate to be chosen to become a god. But before they hand him over to God, they have to find one final god candidate and determine whether the candidate agrees to the deal. It turns out that the final god candidate is a male physics professor named Gaki Yanida, who has always spent his time doing research and he rarely interacts with other humans. The next day, after Mirai found out that the final god candidate was Yanida, they decided to hold a meeting in a public place and be witnessed by everyone without having to keep their real identities secret again. But apparently Yanida prefers to send his angel, Muni, to come to the meeting, while he will watch the meeting via live video. During that meeting, the government sent special military troops to arrest all the god candidates in that place to make the civilians panic with fear. Yanida, who saw the incident via live broadcast, contacted the Prime Minister and asked him to stop the attack. Yanida explained that they only needed 24 hours to discuss the candidate they would choose to become a god. As a result, the Prime Minister ordered the Defense Department to withdraw the military forces and allow the god candidates to continue the election process. After that, Yanida sent a drone to record the vision and mission of each candidate who would nominate himself as a god so he could find out who was worthy of his support. Soon after, Nakomi says that his vision is to help people to die painlessly. Temari then said that her vision was to let humans enjoy a luxurious life without having to work hard so that humans could have fun all the time. Meanwhile, Susumu, who is still very young, says that his vision is to give every human the power of the white arrow so that life in the world becomes as exciting as a game. When it was her turn to convey her vision, Saki was confused about what she would do when she wanted to become a god. But one thing is certain, she wants everyone in the world to smile happily and live their lives well. As for Mirai himself, he admits that he won't do anything if he is chosen to be a god. After conveying their vision and mission, he asked all the candidates in that place to leave and go to a safe place. But just before they left, Yanida suddenly appeared and said God had tricked them all. He explained that humans had created the gods because they wanted a great figure they could worship and lean on. He also reveals that God wanted to appoint one of the humans as his successor to keep him from becoming extinct. Hearing this, Mirai asked Yanida if, indeed, gods were created by humans, then why did gods look for candidates through humans? As a result of the debate, the candidates began to split into several camps where Nakomi chose to join Yanida, while Saki was on the same side as Mirai. In the middle of the debate, Susumu sees a sniper targeting them all and informs all the candidates. But after he managed to warn everyone, Susumu was suddenly shot by one of the snipers and almost fell to the ground. Luckily Yanida moved quickly to catch him and took him away from that place, while Mirai and the other candidates disappeared. However, Susumu could not last much longer, so Yanida killed him and took his power. The next day, Mirai, Saki, and Temari are reunited at Hoshi's house, where they have decided to choose Mirai as the next god. On the other hand, Yanida then stuck an arrow into Nakomi's body so he could control him, and the same thing happened to Hoshi, who was controlled by Yumiki. It turned out that her goal of defeating Hoshi was so they could dig up information about the government's plans for all the candidates. Then Yumiki asked Hoshi to talk to Yanida after discovering that Hoshi was his high school classmate. Previously, Yanida only attended school for 2 weeks and preferred to study alone at home until finally, he succeeded in becoming the great researcher he is now. On the other hand, Yanida tells about his first meeting with Muni, the Angel of Destruction. So far, he has produced various very popular studies, so he has to attend various kinds of meetings and meet many people. This frustrated Yanida because he lost a lot of time and could not complete his research properly. Because of that, he decided to end his life by taking dozens of sleeping pills, but Muni thwarted that attempt. After telling this, Unita asked Aguro to tell him everything about the angels sent by the gods. Then Aguro said that they have to watch out for angels of a special level with special abilities, like Nas, who can touch and connect with humans. On the other hand, Mirai shoots red arrows at Yumiki and Hoshi so others can't control them. But Unita has also taken far more extreme measures in which he controlled the Prime Minister and government officials to get them to side with him. On direct orders from Unita, the government decided to provide a safe meeting place for the god candidates, and they also appealed to the public not to disturb the meeting process. Afterward, he asked the Prime Minister and the National Defense Department not to kill God's candidates without his permission. That night when Minami was sitting in a park with his girlfriend Sayuri, they saw Mirai and Saki shooting high into the sky like a meteor star. So, they purposely flew high into the sky to go to a hill where they could watch the sunrise before the candidate meeting started. The next day when the meeting was about to start, all police officers were deployed to maintain security at the stadium. Some media were also allowed to cover the meeting so the event could be broadcast live. After all the god candidates had gathered, Hoshi tried to persuade Unita to stop creating this mess. But apparently, he didn't want to hear Hoshi's words because he had prepared everything to kill the other god candidates with the help of Nakomi, who he had controlled. Soon after, an argument ensues between Unita and Mirai as he still wants to become a god candidate while Unita rejects the deal. Shortly after, Unita asked the other candidates to leave them at the stadium so they could discuss this privately. Nakomi then takes Saki and the others to a place while Hoshi stays behind to watch over Mirai and Unita so they don't fight. But even though Mirai had talked about his desire to change the world for the better, Unita still saw it as a cliché excuse, and he felt it was impossible to do so. Then he threatens Mirai by telling him that at this time, Nakomi has succeeded in holding Saki hostage, and he wants Mirai to follow his words if Mirai wants Saki to survive. After learning that Saki was in danger, Mirai decided to resign from his position as a god so that Saki could survive Unita's threat. Hearing his answer that he easily gave up his position for a woman made Unita feel disappointed. But Mirai admitted that he would never regret his decision to protect Saki. Hearing this, Unita then gave Mirai a more difficult choice where he had to choose between saving himself or sacrificing himself to save Saki. Then he preferred to sacrifice himself, and could only give up when Unita started shooting a white arrow at him. But apparently, Nas prefers to break the rules by saving Mirai from death, and because of that, she has to go down to become a first-level angel. Nas then gave Mirai a choice to choose the power he wanted to maintain, and Mirai preferred to maintain the power of the red arrows. Seeing that he had survived, Unita tried to attack Mirai a second time using a white arrow, but Saki, who had been freed from Nakomi, suddenly appeared and saved Mirai. It turns out that Nakomi has been conquered by Yumiki, and currently, he can't kill other god candidates. Temari, who appeared from behind, used the opportunity to attack Unita with a white arrow, but Nas saved him. Thanks to that incident, Nas was again promoted to a special level angel, and Unita finally realized all his mistakes. Afterward, Unita intends to end his own life to atone for his mistakes, but Nakomi, who doesn't want to lose him, chooses to volunteer as a god. After all the candidates agreed that Nakomi would become the next god, he was taken away by the angels into the sky to meet the real god. Suddenly, the wings and the power of the white arrows possessed by the god candidates were removed by the angels, and they could return to being ordinary humans. After Nakomi merged with God's soul, he communicated with God's soul in heaven. After the god selection was over, all the surviving god candidates started to live their normal lives as usual. The next day, Unita and Temari start researching the power of the red arrows, while Saki and Mirai decide to live together and get married after college. From the sky above, Nas saw the happy life they had achieved with great emotion, and she felt relieved when she saw that they could live a beautiful relationship as lovers. Several years later, God sees human life on Earth using a magic portal. In the mirror, it is shown that Saki and Mirai have started their flower shop business, Unita and Temari are still doing research, and Hoshi has been appointed as police commissioner, and has married Yumiki. But apart from seeing the lives of humans passing happily, God also realized that the number of humans who took their own lives was also increasing every year. Feeling concerned about this incident, God decided to end his life with a white arrow so that all life in this world disappeared with him. When one by one, the angels disappear, and every human being in this world also disappears. Shortly before their destiny ended, Saki said that she had already felt very happy to be able to live with Mirai, and she had given up if they had to disappear from this world. The anime ends. The moral message that we can learn from this anime is don't forget to always cherish every moment we have with the people we love because we will never know when a moment will be our last time with them.